Excuse me, everybody, we're talking about the Battle of Brooklyn / Long Island. And just a quick recap, we last talked about Evacuation Day, March 17th, 1776. And the Brits had evacuated after we were on Dorchester Heights. Washington stayed there, I believe, for just a couple of weeks tops, and then decided that he better go secure New York. That was the most obvious place that he thought they would come to, following when they responded. And he was right. New York was pivotal in that it split the colonies, and it was a harbor. So he guessed they would go to New York. That's eventually what happened. And what's the period of time we're talking about?
It's March 1776, and then he starts bringing his people down. By mid-April, they had landed in New York, and it wasn't until August that the battle took place.
Okay, so that's it, and that's where we're at. And here goes Rick for today. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, guys. Hope you enjoy this. We're going to touch base on all the different aspects that was listed in the program that Glenn had printed out. So first we're going to talk about briefly the battle itself, and then we'll get into the particulars based on why he did it, the significance of New York, some of the British blunders that really saved our ass, and then basically the evacuation across the East River, which due to some fortuitous weather, we saved most of our troops. So we'll do all that tonight. Just bear with us, and then afterwards, Louis got a nice movie that he's going to show regarding the battle. As Glenn had mentioned, we left off with the British evacuating Boston, got on boats, and went to Nova Scotia. Washington had the foresight to guess correctly that the next target would be New York. So by mid-April, Washington marched his 19,000 soldiers to lower Manhattan, and he strengthened the batteries that guarded the harbor, which was very important, and constructed forts in northern Manhattan and on the Brooklyn Heights across the East River on Long Island. I'm amazed that these guys could march 215, 220 miles with those heavy guns and backpacks full of ammunition, fruit cups, and Rice Krispie treats. I mean, it's unbelievable how these guys could do this. You know, you got to figure it's early to midsummer while they're marching. Okay, it's not a beautiful path. It's not constructed. They're going through woods and mountains and through rivers and mosquitoes and all the rest of it. So I mean, it's incredible. 215 miles on foot carrying all this stuff. I get tired driving 20 miles, let alone imagining how these guys did it. Okay, so Washington and his troops were there, and they were waiting throughout June for the British to appear. And he hoped that his undisciplined troops could hold off an attack, which he was certain would come in Manhattan, around Manhattan. In early July, 400, now get this, 400 British ships with 32,000 men, commanded by William Howe, General Howe, arrived at Staten Island. I would love to be there just to see 400 ships with 32,000 men aboard. That's got to be just an unbelievable sight. Unbelievable. When Howe arrived at Staten Island, he offered up a pardon to the rebels, to the American patriots. Washington answered back, "Those who have committed no fault want no pardon." While he was convinced that the British would attack Manhattan, he sent more troops to Brooklyn. Okay, so Washington was convinced that the attack would come in Manhattan, but just to play it safe, he sent some troops to Brooklyn. Washington placed General Israel Putnam in charge of Brooklyn Heights. Putnam was a man that we heard of before. Okay, we talked about him a couple weeks ago. He also stationed General John Sullivan to the south and Lord Sterling to the southwest of the heights of Guam. Washington also posted guards along the main roads leading through the heights, but he failed to secure the rarely used Jamaica Pass to the east, and this proved to be a costly mistake, because since General Howe moved 20,000 men through the pass on the evening of August 26th and attacked the Americans on Brooklyn Heights from the rear. So I made a small map, and when I say small, that's an understatement. You need it. Hope you got your readers with you tonight. The best thing to do is follow the colored lines. Okay, the red lines were the British, the way they moved. The blue lines were the American setups. All right. So on August 26th, Howe led his troops and attacked the Americans on Brooklyn Heights from the rear. At the same time, one of his generals, Leopold Philipp von Heister, would launch his Hessians against Sullivan's troops, while the redcoats of General James Grant would attack Sterling's position. So they really had us surrounded, all right? Early in the morning of August 27th, British soldiers fired on American pickets stationed near the Red Lion Tavern at a crossroads in Brooklyn. Washington hurried across the East River from Manhattan, but could do little more than observe the fight from a fort on Cobble Hill. Sullivan's men fought bravely, but were cut down by the Hessian artillery with bayonets. And when he realized the main British force had come through the Jamaica Pass and would soon surround him, Sullivan ordered his men to retreat to Brooklyn Heights before he himself was captured. An interesting part of this whole battle was the General Sterling, he held off the British troops for several hours, but retreated when he also realized that he would be surrounded himself. And he led 400 Maryland soldiers in a desperate fight at the Old Stone House, giving his soldiers time to flee before he was taken prisoner himself. Washington, who looked down on the terrible scene, could only remark, "Good God, what brave fellows I must lose." So they were in desperate heights. They were surrounded, and thank God for this General Sterling, who bought us enough time so we could evacuate and then could get the hell out of there and get closer to Brooklyn Heights, which was near the East River. This next section is one of the British blunders. General Howe halted the fighting by the early afternoon and directed his men to dig trenches around the American position on the next day. Before they would be surrounded, Washington ordered his men to evacuate Long Island. From late in the evening of August 29 to dawn the following morning, Washington watched as 9,000 Continental soldiers were rowed back across the East River to Manhattan. And as the sun came up, a heavy fog, miraculously descended on the remaining men crossing the river. And according to eyewitnesses, Washington was the last man to leave Brooklyn. So that's a very brief description of what took place on those 2 days. Let's get into some particulars and some statistics. The Battle of Long Island was also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of Brooklyn Heights, and it was the first major engagement of the American Revolutionary War after the United States Declaration of Independence. It was fought on August 27, 1776, and it was the largest battle of the entire war in terms of troop deployment and combat. Key battle facts. The outcome, a decisive British victory. The commanders, the American commander, good old General George Washington, the British commander, General William Howe. What were we up against? Well, approximately 20,000 British soldiers and Hessian troops faced roughly 10,000 Americans. The casualties were heavy. Americans suffered heavy losses, with about 300 killed and about 1,000 or more captured, while the British casualties were approximately 64 killed and 293 wounded. So we took an ass kicking at that battle. Course of the battle. The British executed a brilliant night march through the lightly defended Jamaica Pass, attacking us from the rear, outflanking the American forward position at Guam Heights. Surprised and outnumbered, the Continental Army fled towards the main defenses on Brooklyn Heights. The Maryland 400, let's go a little bit more in depth with that. It was a contingent of the 1st Maryland Regiment made a heroic stand at the Old Stone House, sacrificing themselves to buy time for the rest of the army to retreat across the Gowans Creek. The miracle retreat. With their backs to the East River and a British siege looming, Washington orchestrated a daring nighttime evacuation on April 29th in the 30th, the morning of the 30th. Under the cover of a heavy fog and darkness, 9,000 soldiers ferried across the river to Manhattan without a single loss of life. Again, miraculously due to this heavy fog, which they said never appeared during this time, and we had some divine intervention at that time. So pretty lucky on our part. What was the significance of New York during the Battle of Long Island? Well, as Glenn talked a little bit about it earlier, the significance during the Battle of Long Island was rooted in its status as a vital strategic prize that offered control over the American colonies. It was the first major battle fought after the Declaration and remained the largest engagement of the entire Revolutionary War. The importance of New York. It was a vital port and hub. New York City possessed one of the largest deep water ports in North America, making it a critical center for commerce and an ideal maritime base for the British Royal Navy. Control of New York allowed the British to threaten the Hudson River Lake Champlain corridor, potentially isolating the rebellious New England colonies from the rest of the continent. So its strategic location and value was immense. Also, it was a loyalist stronghold. The city and surrounding areas contained significant loyalist populations, providing the British with support local bases for the duration of the conflict. A lot of loyalists there in New York City. Military consequences. Continental Army survival. Despite a crushing tactical defeat, George Washington executed a daring nighttime retreat across the East River to Manhattan on the nights of August 29th and the morning of August 30th. Aided by heavy fog, he evacuated roughly 9,000 troops without losing a single life, preserving the core of his armies to fight another day. What were the major British mistakes during the Battle of Long Island? During the Battle of Long Island, also known as the Battle of Brooklyn, the British secured a tactical victory but committed several strategic errors that allowed our army to survive to continue the war. Their major mistake or error was failure to press the advantage. The most significant mistake was General Howe's decision not to storm the American fortifications at Brooklyn Heights after his initial success. Instead of a direct assault, Howe opted for a slow, traditional siege, digging trenches to approach the American lines. His big worry was the fear of casualties. Haunted by the heavy losses sustained at Bunker Hill, Howe was hesitant to order a frontal attack against the entrenched positions. This delay gave Washington the window needed to organize a retreat, which many historians believe saved the Revolutionary War from an early end. Naval and surveillance lapses. Despite having overwhelming naval superiority, the British failed to block the Americans' only escape route. Following the crushing defeat at the Battle of Long Island, Washington orchestrated a miraculous nighttime evacuation that saved the Continental Army from certain destruction. Trapped on Brooklyn Heights with their backs to the East River and facing superior British forces of over 30,000 men, Washington recognized his position was untenable. Had to be a miserable feeling to recognize you're outnumbered almost 3-1, and you're on the run. You're going back to Manhattan, not knowing what's coming next. The nighttime evacuation. That night, Washington ordered a silent retreat. To maintain the illusions of presence, he had soldiers tend to campfires and move about the trenches while thousands of his troops were quietly ferried across the mile-wide river to Manhattan. So he put on a little bit of a ruse, okay? He had men light campfires, make noises sounding like they were still entrenched there, while the majority of his troops were silently crossing, the East River back to Manhattan in a silent retreat. The Marblehead Mariners. The success of the operation relied on Colonel John Glover and his regiment of sailors and fishermen from Marblehead, Massachusetts. These skilled mariners rowed flat-bottom boats back and forth throughout the night, transporting approximately 9,000 men, along with artillery and supplies, in total silence. It's tough to believe, okay, total silence. Either the British were drunk celebrating their victory, or God knows why they couldn't hear, but that pretending that they were still entrenched there with campfires and making some odd noises must have convinced the British that we were still there. A providential fog. As dawn approached, the evacuation was still incomplete. However, a thick, miraculous fog descended upon the Brooklyn side, concealing the final movements from the British, while the Manhattan side remained clear. Again, miraculous. Where we were stationed was under heavy fog. Where we were going to was crystal clear. Washington reportedly stayed on the Brooklyn shore until the very end, stepping onto the final boat just as the fog began to lift. That's it. That's the story of the miraculous fog in the Long Island battle. Again, we got an ass kicking, but we were sort of fortuitous that we got most of our men out of there to fight another day. Questions, comments, concerns? Hi, Lou.
Didn't the British capture an American in one of those bars, and they forced him to give up that one route that they could surround the Americans on?
That's probably true. Again,
I forgot his name, but they had
all these guys seem to blend together when you come to it. But they're not familiar to us. I think the biggest aspect of this was that Maryland 400, where they sacrificed themselves to hold the British off, while the majority of our troops that were stationed in Brooklyn got to the East River and were able to eventually escape. If those guys, the Maryland 400, didn't sacrifice themselves, we could have lost everybody, okay, and the war could have been quickly over.
Yeah, because Washington only left five troops governing that one pass.
The Jamaica Pass.
Yeah, because they brought 20,000 men.
Right. He didn't know. I mean, you could call it a mistake. He thought they were going to go towards Manhattan. They did an end run and went around the rear and through the Jamaica Pass. Okay.
Couple things. The Maryland 400, that's known as the first major sacrifice in U.S. history. Nearly all of them died or were captured.
Right.
Very few of them survived. The issue of the Jamaica Pass. Washington, as usual, did not say that he made a mistake, but he knew he made a mistake.
Right.
And according to his writings afterwards, he did not expect them to know about the Jamaica Pass. He thought there was no way they were going to go, but they were British had loyalists leading them and showing them the way. I think you may mention
Right.
that. So that was a surprise. And then by getting through the Jamaica Pass, we were stuck basically up along the East River.
Right.
And keep in mind, everybody, Brooklyn is not Brooklyn like today. Brooklyn was farmland, pastures, small villages, that kind of thing. So, and I think you mentioned this was the largest battle of the entire war, from beginning to end.
It's a lot of men. 30,000 British soldiers, 9,000 American soldiers. You walk down 19,000 from Boston, which is still an amazing feat that I can't believe. But luck was on our side. Somebody up above had our backs. Paulie, you want to say a few words? You're holding the mic. I don't know. Oh, you're just holding it for a minute.
Where did after they got over by Manhattan, where'd they end up
That's
doing?
the next question. We'll talk about that the next time.
The fog, did you know that, according to the weather people, meteorologists, whatever,
Correct.
they say there's never been a fog recorded thicker than that night, which is
Again, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, extreme luck. We have somebody looking over us.
Washington did not cross until the end, right?
Right, he was the last man to step on board, the last ferry to cross the river.
Awesome.
It was awesome. I mean, considering this guy was, everybody makes a mistake, and like Glenn said, he didn't admit it was his mistake. They got their information from the loyalists who've been there, and I'm sure once they got there, okay, it was another month before they decided to battle, so I'm sure they had their spies or their network, okay, get involved with the loyalists, saying which is another way that they would expect us to come. Again, Washington was convinced they were going to land on Manhattan. That's where he had the majority of his troops. And again, to pull an end run, the British went behind our lines and caught us from the rear.
And keep in mind that this is considered by historians as the biggest what if the Revolutionary War, the entire war. And we're going to have something coming up in a month or two about miraculous escapes and how many times we think. But this was it. This was our entire army.
Right.
And if Howe had pursued it, the only reason he didn't was he was trying to avoid a frontal assault. He also thought reconciliation was still a potential, they say. That's in his writings afterwards, because, they were, King George was probably like, hey,
Let's get on with this. Right.
why did you not proceed there and just slaughter him? That would have been it. That would have been it.
Well, 100 years from that, that's very similar to what the Americans were going through during the Civil War. Hesitancy was one of our major problems, okay? We did not, when we had the advantage during the Civil War, take advantage of the Southern Army being defeated, being down. General McClellan was noted for his patience and his hesitancy, which really pissed off Lincoln. Lincoln wanted to once he had won a battle, to keep on going, press forward. But they didn't. He was hesitant, which gave the Southern Army a chance to regroup. And 100 years earlier, the same thing with Howe. He did not want to risk his men. Again, another frontal assault because he got his ass kicked at Bunker Hill, lost a lot of men. He didn't want that to happen again. So, again, history repeats itself, and it's incredible how, like Glenn had mentioned, if what happened, if they would have took the stronghold and went right after us, we probably all would be wearing red jackets sipping tea tonight instead of whatever. So.
And the emotions were high. We had just 8 weeks earlier declared independence.
Right.
This was after the Declaration of Independence.
Correct. So we were on a high note. Everybody was happy, and thank God that we survived this attack and lived to fight another day. Jimmy, wake up, Jim. You have anything to say?
Of course he does.
It was really just in so many instances when you take a look at this battle, it was dumb luck. In so many ways it happened. And you want to talk about divine intervention, you want to talk about good guess, and in many instances, I think that all plays into it. Perhaps the divine intervention with the founding of the nation.
Yep.
That's one thing that I always think about is by the grace of God. By the grace of God. And it's just amazing how things can happen that way.
Yeah, fate is really something else. Anybody else? Jacob, you want to contribute anything? Go ahead. Anybody else after Jacob wants to, chip in, feel free to do so. This is an open forum here.
What's going on, everybody? Don't have a whole lot to say today, but Rick, did we talk about the decoration at all yet?
We did that last week. Glenn did a tremendous, last time Glenn did a tremendous, presentation on the declaration and a lot of different sidebars that went along with it, so he did a fabulous job.
Yeah, all I wanted to mention is that when the Declaration of Independence was drafted up, Washington wasn't there because he was preparing to fight this battle. And the reason is because this battle took a ton of planning. Washington had the foresight to set up in Manhattan, even though they attacked us in Brooklyn, quote unquote. But actually, his setup in Manhattan kind of tricked the British a little bit. So it gave us a little bit more time to kind of reroute the British. They went up and around and then came back behind us. But that slowed motion gave us more time to set up. But other than that, it was a pretty bloody battle and pretty lopsided for the British. But again, just our American spirit, the endurance that we had, and of course God, of course, give the glory to him during our revolution, of course. So that's all I got to add.
Thank you. Anybody else? Comments, concerns? Anybody from the back ranges?
Lee?
Lee?
No, I just also think, you know, you said it in a short little snippet, 400 votes,
That's amazing.
32,000 men. You talk about, you got, you're getting 9,000 across the river with that kind of fleet,
Right.
and that's a deep water channel. There's no holding back.
Right, they could have been right there waiting for us.
Absolutely. So when you talk about divine, there's a book called Miraculous Cloud, and it's all about the Battle of Brooklyn, and it talks about how miraculous that fog was that morning that protected the guys.
Incredible. Well, we saw one of the earlier films when the British started coming into the Boston Harbor, and they showed some of those boats approaching with their troops. These boats were massive, and I can't imagine 400 in a crack, sitting in the New York Harbor. That's just mind-boggling. It really is. I think that would have been a tremendous sight. I would love to have been an eagle or a pigeon from above watching to see what was happening, because it had to be terrifying yet exciting as well. Anybody else?
Any prominent Jews involved in this?
I'm not aware of any.
Friends, right, Paulie? Friends.
They were in the background funding it, I'm sure.
We had Israel.
Israel Putnam?
Yeah, that's true.
Anybody else? Please, speak up. I know I went fast. There really wasn't a lot of detail to talk about, okay, other than what was going on, and we sort of explained it.
The reason Paulie just asked a question about why didn't the British warships, why weren't they there? Right? They had come in through out by Long Island,
Right.
but it was too narrow and it was not deep enough. So they did not quite, they weren't quite able to get, they weren't sitting there waiting for it.
Right.
In other words.
They camped out on Staten Island. That's where they first came in. Okay, so it had to be a sight to behold. I mean, 400 of these ships, and not only carrying soldiers, but you had supplies and cooks and all the,
And these weren't pleasure cruises.
Right.
These were
Right.
battleships. They were all battles.
It's just what was it, a 2-week crossing from Great Britain to North America? You had all this food to store on board, plus people, plus supplies. What an amazing adventure that must have been. Anybody else? Yes, Gary.
Well, then them guys.
No, okay. Gary in the back first, and then Gary up
All
front.
right. Well, we're talking a lot about the British naval forces in their logistics. But basically, Howe stops his advance at what? 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Correct.
Washington starts the evacuation at dusk.
Actually, later, at probably around midnight.
All right, so thanks to the fog, we get a couple extra hours.
Correct.
So in 10, 11, 12 hours, you move 9,000 American troops across the river.
Right.
That's 800 to 1,000 people an hour. Where did we get the boats?
Well, the Marblehead guys, these guys, mariners from Marblehead, Massachusetts, these guys were experts in ferrying people in these flatboats. They just loaded them up.
So they bring the boats from Massachusetts?
No, most of them were, well, the Marblehead guys had their boats, but most of them were for local fishermen.
Yep.
Most of the boats that they, what do you call it, recon, whatever.
Yeah, the
Most
ferry.
of the things they got were from local fishermen.
So apparently the local fishermen were not loyalists?
Probably not the ones they got the boats from. You know, and again, that talks about the camaraderie and the urge based on signing the Declaration that we're all patriots now. You know, everybody wanted to pitch in. If you were an able-bodied person, a patriot around New York City, you wanted to do your part. Unlike what's going on in this country today, where we got these, whatever, I'm not going to get political, but, you know, people on one side don't want to do anything, and then they criticize when somebody does something. They're the first to open up their goddamn mouth and criticize. Everybody here, okay, pitched in, okay? They pitched in. And it was true during the rest of all the other wars up until Vietnam. Everybody in this country was supportive of the war effort. Vietnam came along and screwed everything up, and then from that point on, it's been a disaster.
The Maryland 400, Colonel Smallwood, Washington actually asked for volunteers to do that job. He did not require anybody to do it. They were the first to say they wanted to do it because they were more experienced. And they became known as Washington's Immortals. I actually have the book, if anybody wants to borrow it.
That sounds interesting. I like the book that Lee was talking about too. What do you call it? The big cloud or something, the big fog, or the
The
incredible,
miraculous.
the miraculous cloud or miraculous fog. That would be interesting to read too. Paulie.
When Glenn's saying Marbleheads, how did they get that name, or what exactly?
From Marblehead, Massachusetts. It's a city, a fishing village in Massachusetts. Marblehead, yeah. Not Dumbhead, but Marblehead.
John Glover.
Yeah, right. John Glover. Lee.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, when you mentioned the Marblehead group, you gotta remember, they marched from Massachusetts down to.
Right.
New York City. They also marched over here later on in the war, 600 miles. Washington commanded them to go from New York City to Yorktown.
It's incredible what these guys had to go through. Like I said, carrying these backpacks and these heavy-ass rifles and their ammunition and whatever else they carried in that, that's just an amazing feat.
Right. How many people did we lose due to exhaustion?
Oh, exhaustion,
Right,
disease, whatever.
right, during the march.
Correct. Gary up front.
I was just, with all that sailing going on and being out in salt water, the potable water required to sustain life, per man, per day. And that's a lot of water.
Oh, to carry on board those ships to sustain those soldiers? Absolutely.
And then to be able to haul food around, you basically what it comes down to is they had onions. Onions don't spoil like other things, and they got enough vitamins so that you don't get scurvy,
right.
dysentery. I can't talk. I feel like a wimp when I'm thinking these guys are on a boat for 2 weeks, have an onion for breakfast and an onion for dinner, and then tomorrow we're gonna have onions.
I hate onions. I'd have been dead within 2 days.
I'm with you, Rick.
You had to have vitamin C,
Right. Gary.
Actually, they got known for using limes to get their vitamin C, and that's why the British are known as limeys.
Absolutely.
Really?
Right.
And then they used rum to purify the water to keep it stable. So it was actually right up until almost the 1980s, it was written in British naval boards that each sailor was allowed at least 1 pint of grog, water and rum, per day.
Nothing wrong with that. Go ahead. Who's Tim? I'm sorry. This is
The thing to remember, the American soldiers were not getting paid for this whole time during the war. And and a lot of them were starting to talk.
Mutiny? Yeah.
And a few of them got shot because of that.
Right.
with salt to preserve it. So if you wanna talk about not having a salt-free diet,
Right.
there was no such thing.
But again, it's the commitment of these guys, you know, just like these people at the airports today, these TSA officers, not getting paid in 3 or 4 weeks, and they're still there, most of them, you gotta take your hats off to these guys, really do. Anybody else, please?
Did you mention the Haitians? Because the Haitians were with, Von Roush or whatever his name was,
We mentioned that briefly, that they had their own unit, and they were, you know, these guys were they just, mercenaries, right. They were paid, you know, by the British to wreak havoc on anybody they chose.
They were dogs for hire and they were guns.
Yes, yes. You know, later on, we're gonna get to a point where, around Valley Forge, when my favorite person comes up, Baron von Steuben, okay, who trained, these American forces basically at Valley Forge, whipping them into a fine fighting unit. And his story is just amazing. So we'll get to that in a couple weeks. Anybody else? Any comments, concerns, bits of trivial information? Lou?
These, Hessians, what they did when they came to a town, they enslaved the women and children, they killed the men, and then sometimes they just put the women, children, and men in a church or a building and torched it to the ground.
Yeah.
They didn't give a shit.
Well, that's what happened in the movie The Patriot. You know, if you guys watch The Patriot, okay, that asshole general for whatever he was for the British, he locked all the people in the church and set the church on fire. Right, okay, nice guy.
Mel Gibson's wife and
Yeah.
daughter-in-law.
Correct. Well, they got theirs in the end, or he got his too. So, and another guy we're going to talk about, my man Ray here, we're going to talk about the Swamp Fox. Okay, Francis Marion. Okay, he was the first of the guerrilla war fighters. Okay, came up with amazing ideas how to hide and sneak and catch the British off guard. So there's a lot of good stories down the road. Okay, so please come back. It's great to see everybody here again. A lot of people are coming back every week, which is great. Okay, I'm shocked because when I speak, I felt this place should be empty, but you guys keep coming back, so you're gluttons for punishment. Anybody, Glenn?
No. Anybody else?
Anybody else? Okay.
I think what another thing to think about is this really showed Washington's ability to command people. The fact that he was able to get that many, all those troops over the East River took a lot of coordination because these guys were probably scared. They wanted
Without question. In silence, and they did this in silence. I don't know if he had a gun to their head and said, keep your goddamn mouth shut or whatever, but these guys had to be terrified. They had to be panic struck because they knew at any time the British could come after them. And they did this evacuation in the dead of night without making a sound. That's a good point. Great leadership there. Great leadership. Anybody else? Gary.
I think your fight, when you're here and you're an American and the Declaration of Independence is established, and this is your family, this is your life, this is your home, the incentive to win. And you know.
That's probably the number one factor in why we won the war. Okay, we were fighting to protect our own land, our own families, our own farms. Okay, the British, after a while, I'm sure these British soldiers, their minds were someplace else. They wanted to be back home in their own beds with their wives and kids. Okay, they probably lost a lot of incentive being here. You know, they thought they were going to be, this is going to be a quick, 2-month, 3-month war, and everybody's going to be back home. And it played out for a long time. And I thought, when you guard your own land, you fight a hell of a lot harder than you do if you're 5,000 miles overseas.
Do you think that trip from Great Britain to New York was 2 weeks or longer?
Don't know exactly. It could have been longer. It could have been, a lot depends on the weather. But usually in summertime, the waters are pretty calm, don't you think? If this was October, November, it probably would have taken a longer time. Right.
Back then on those ships, because there was no auxiliary power.
Right. It's wind or no wind. Right.
You were at the whim of the wind and the current.
Correct. And it probably did take longer than 3 weeks. carrying all those people and all those supplies, it was probably closer to 3 or 4 weeks than 2 weeks, which even intensifies the amount of supplies and drinking water that these guys had to bring along. And in what condition were these guys when they got off the boat? You know, they weren't probably fit either.
Is there any stats on how many ships the British lost coming here?
No, I didn't realize that, but even if they lost a few, 400 is a hell of a lot. That's a big boatload. I wish I could have saw that. That had to be just an amazing sight.
Okay, guys, we have a video which will cover a lot of what we talked about, more theatrical. And after that, we'll go through additional questions, and we have a special edition of Revolutionary Trivia taking place right afterwards.
Wonderful. And then the following 2 weeks, we got special guests coming in to talk about different strategies of both the British and the American armies and how they went about their business. And then after that, my friend Jake's going to talk about the Battle of Trenton. So we got a lot of good things planned over the next month or so. And, you know, keep your eyes peeled to those emails that Glenn sends out with the schedule, because that may change a little bit, because I know Glenn recently had asked a lot of other people to do some presentations, and he's got about 8 or 9 different presenters that are going to present on different topics throughout the next upcoming month. So
hopefully everybody's preparing.
Yes, so it's going to be fun. A lot of different topics, a lot of offshoots. Okay, from food to dress to whatever. Okay, I think we're going to do a presentation about flags, the American flags and stuff like that. So keep on coming back. It's great to see everybody coming back here every week. Hopefully it's educational. Again, we get to chat a little bit with you guys. You guys ask tremendous questions, have tremendous comments, and we really appreciate your input. So it makes it a lot of fun. Anybody else before we start the movie?
Before we start,
Okay, Bert.
I heard a few comments about the cloud cover being divine intervention. And so I did a quick little Google search to see if God actually, like in scripture, if God used a cloud to cover, like say the Israelites, or I couldn't find anything like that. But what I did find is that God's presence appears in a cloud. Like whenever a heavy cloud, God moved in the cloud. That's as close as I could come.
Hey, whatever it takes,
Yeah,
you know, it helped us out immensely, and it was obviously greatly appreciated. And we should thank our lucky stars and do a little Hail Mary or whatever we got to do every night to say, you know, this is one of the reasons we're here tonight, because of some divine intervention. Gary up front.
Printed material back then was rare.
Very rare.
And there wasn't a lot of it. But what was commonly found on our side with each soldier was a copy of the New Testament.
The New Testament.
And God-fearing people, I would say. I've heard stories about Washington, you know, how many horses got shot off from underneath him, how many holes were in his clothes, bullets going through his coat. And people speculate that there was divine intervention to save his life. God knows I can't verify that, but I think
There's got to be something to it. I mean,
yeah,
the odds are sort of against you. You know, if you know you get 20 rounds fired at you, nothing hits. You know, there's something.
How do you explain it? Yeah.
Right. How do you explain that?
We're gonna do a whole session on that kind of stuff, miraculous escapes and near misses and
Fantastic.
all the stuff.
I don't know if you guys heard that, but Paulie said we're going to do a session on miraculous escapes in different situations that we got out of. Okay, that was it divine intervention? Was it luck? Whatever. But that's another topic coming up in the next several weeks or months. Lou.
Just so you know, the average trip from England to the colonies took anywhere between 6 and 10 weeks.
6 to 10 weeks, okay? And that's based on, on the weather conditions, the wind and whatever. So you're talking, 3 to 4, or, 2 or 3 months, or 2 or 3 months, or whatever. So interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. Augie, good to see you. I never did recognize you with the hat on. How did you make out yesterday?
You mean today?
Or today?
The cancer wasn't big enough to operate on, so he froze it.
Good. Glad to hear that. Successful. Excellent. All right. Without further ado, let's get Bobby. You want to dim the lights? Oh, wait. I'm sorry.
On another note, I just like, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I'd like to congratulate Glenn and the Buffalo Extreme.
Yes.
The
Final Four. Good job. Final Four.
Going to Georgia.
And Lou, of course.
And Lou.
Only because of Lou.
Lou's up next too.
Georgia will never be the same.
I wanted to get the exact words because you brought up divine intervention in Washington. There was a chief that recalled seeing Washington at the Battle of the Monongahela in 1755, the French and Indian War. I knew this story, but I didn't know the words he said. But he said at the time something to the effect of, about Washington, who was 21 at the time. He had gotten 4 bullets in his jacket, had his horse shot out from him, jumped on another horse, and I don't know what happened to the first horse, I guess he's died. But, the chief of the Indians that were involved, he cannot die in battle. The Great Spirit protects that man and guides his destiny. He will become chief of nations, and a people yet unborn will hail him as the founder of a mighty empire. He said that about Washington when Washington was 21 years old.
Wow.
Incredible.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
That is crazy.
It is amazing. Well, thank you guys for being a great audience tonight. Enjoy the video, and hope to see you back here.